one of my favorite professors in seminary, his name is Dr. Chris Thompson. He taught moral theology, and he was phenomenal. At one point, I had a question for him. This is after class, and he said, "Well, hey, I gotta have lunch. You eat lunch?" Sure. He's like, "Come with me." And so we drove through McDonald's, and we sat in his van outside this park, and he just told me his vocation story. And part of his story was he said, "When I really came to know the Lord, I really wanted to be a priest. I had this longing." But he said, I discerned this. And what I discerned was, among other things, he said, I discerned that if I were to be ordained a priest, it would appeal to all of my worst vices. He said, I would be so self-indulgent. I'd be so self-concerned, and I would be that priest who, it says, it's 4:00. I'm going over to the rectory. I'm shutting the door, pulling the blind, punching the clock. And he said, I know it would destroy my soul. And so, I mean, that wasn't the only thing, because that can be a temptation for anybody. But he knew that I need a vocation that will call me out of myself and make me demand that I love when I don't feel like loving. And that's one of the things I'm so grateful for, being on campus in this weird situation where I'm 5 steps away all the time. At the same time, like you said, that's welcome to fatherhood. I see my brothers and my brothers-in-law, and I think, you guys are always tired. I'm always tired. Hey,
I can relate.
We can relate to each other.
I'm thinking about Father Jeremiah sharing with his own brothers, the younger and the older, his call to the priesthood, and his conversations with the vocations director, and his whole discernment with the bishop and all. And that's when it came out that our first 2 sons, Michael and Gabriel, had independently of each other considered the priesthood. And I'm going to try to keep this sufficiently generic, vague, and discreet. They went to talk to somebody, again, unbeknownst to each other. And the person that my oldest son talked to said, "Oh, you want to be a priest? Let me assure you, it is comfortable. You have job security. You have vacation time. You can determine your hours, And I can understand why my oldest son said, I left feeling like I was running out of a burning house.
Yeah.
That would have been like a lifestyle of self-indulgence to which he was already tempted, and out came a similar tale from his younger brother. Gabriel had also gone. If you had told Gabriel, you want to be a priest? Well, you better get ready to be martyred. You're going to be persecuted, misunderstood, especially since the corruption. You're going to be, viewed with disdain. Sign me up, But it was the same thing. That was comfy, cozy, job security, golfing, and all that kind of thing. And he had a similar reaction. And I think maybe the generation before, maybe in the 80s and 90s, I don't want to speculate. I'm not even sure I'd want to know the answer to my question, exactly why it happened, or where, or when. But, the fact is, the call to the priesthood is a call to follow Christ first and foremost, a call to be holy. But I mean, you can do that in holy matrimony, for sure. You're supposed to. But when Father Jeremiah discerned, it was an adventure.
Right.
And we've got another son, Joe, who's in the seminary. He's in his apostolic year, about 15 minutes from here, on assignment at Blessed Sacrament, and he's discerning. We're not certain yet, Lord willing, but it's the same kind of thing, the spirit of freedom. But let me turn this around to you and ask, what is it that you would say to young men to open them up to consider the priesthood? Because most young men just assume marriage is as high as it gets, and I'm not even sure I'm ready for that kind of commitment. So, Catholic American men are often more American than Catholic. And so what would you say to open up a typical Catholic man in America today in his late teens or early 20s to get him consider the fact that he might be called?
Yeah, well, that's a great question, because I would say, you mentioned even part of that story that I had was pretty indifferent to the Lord, to the faith. I mean, I would even say, I don't want to say hated, but I hated going to Mass, I'll tell you that. But I remember I had this conviction of sin in my life. I had this sense of like, oh my gosh, that's not just these sins that I learned about in school. Like that's here. That's in me. And I remember thinking, I can't forgive myself. Meaning I can forgive myself, but I can't forgive myself, Right. And I'm like, I need a savior. And it was like, bing, oh hey. Wow. And it was, I knew I needed to pray. I knew I needed to go to confession. I didn't know how to pray. It's a whole other story. But I knew that, well, I hadn't really put two and two together that they have confessions on Saturday, but I knew where the priest lived. And so at 10 o'clock on a Tuesday morning, I rode my bike across town to the priest's house and knocked on the door and Father, can I go to confession? I always say he was there because they only work one day a week. And and he's like, sure, come on in. And I sat down on the couch, went to confession. I left, and I remember stepping off that front porch, and I had three really distinct thoughts. I remember the first thought was, God, thank you. I walked into this house with this sin. I'm walking out free. I'm walking out completely forgiven. And I just thank you so much. My first thought, thank you. My second thought was, God, if you call me to be a priest, I will hear anyone's confession anytime they ask. And I'd never thought about being a priest before because, I mean, why would I? I was indifferent to the whole thing. And that was, that I look back on that and think of what Pope Benedict had said in God is Love about how being a Christian is not the result of an ethical choice or a lofty ideal, but the result of an encounter with a person that gives one's life a new horizon and sets it in a decisive direction. Because I can trace everything back to that moment where it was, God, you did this for me. If I could do this for someone else, tell me, just let me know. So my first thought, thank you. My second thought, God, if you want me to be a priest, I'll hear anyone's confession whenever they ask. My third thought was, oh, she's really cute. So that was like, that the start of the battle. Like, what do I do then? But that was it. And that sense of what any man needs to ask is, have you encountered the true Jesus? Have you encountered the love of God that saved you? Because if you have, then you're his, there's that sense of, if you have, then what do you want me to do, Lord? And that sense of, I'll do anything you ask me. And that, I think that's the first thing.
I really appreciate how you answered my question. It wasn't at all what I expected. I would have expected 4 or 5 points that you would present to a young man. In the back of my mind, I always think to myself that if a young man tells me he has no attraction whatsoever to the priesthood, that doesn't tell me he's not called. It just tells me that he hasn't understood the priesthood yet. Mm-hmm. To understand it makes it intrinsically attractive, appealing. You might not be called to it, but it won't be because there's nothing appealing or attractive about the sacramental life of a priest. But that's not the same thing that you just did. What you did was to share your story. How old were you, 14, 15?
15 or 16, 15,
yeah.
There.
Yeah, and it reminds me, of course, of what Pope Paul VI emphasized when he brought the church to this new awakening of the importance of evangelization, that modern people listen more to witnesses than to teachers. And if you're going to teach, you ought to do so in terms of teaching the truth, but bearing witness to how you discovered it or experienced it, that sort of thing. So bearing witness in the context of friendship, and at the same time, more than turning around and saying, well, let me confront you. Have you ever had that experience? Just the fact that you did and you shared it and it was life-changing. I think everybody who's honest will say, yeah, of course, I've had multiple experiences of feeling alone, alienated, distant from God, where all of a sudden sin is not just a theory, but a struggle personally for me. But the idea that you rode your bike, you knocked on the door, he let you in, and he heard your confession, it's just a reminder to me that when a priest pronounces the words of consecration, here's a mortal man, my son, you, speaking human words over earthly matter, transforming it into what? The creator and the redeemer of the universe, his body, blood, soul, and divinity. You really believe that? With all my heart. And I understand why people don't. Yeah, of course, But the words of absolution, likewise, for that priest to have absolved you, you walked in a penitent, but you also probably walked in at least on the edge of mortal sin. So you walk in a spiritual corpse. Mm-hmm. You're not just forgiven. It's not just a criminal being pardoned. More than Lazarus is raised from the dead by Jesus saying, Lazarus, come forth. A priest pronounces the words of absolution and restores someone not to the physical life that Lazarus got back, but to a divine eternal life that we forfeit for what? Fleeting pleasures, And that to me is the moment of grace. That is the grace of conversion. That also then becomes the door for the grace of vocation. Like if a guy like him could do that for a guy like me, what in the world why would I not want to be at least open to that?
Yeah, and that was the next thing was that sense of, God, just let me know then. Just tell me. And there was such I thought openness, to that.
Yeah.
Just because then what happened was my mom had all these stacks of books. She might have had someone in this room's cassette tape series of things as well. I don't
look
know.
around.
But so
must have been the 90s.
So great. It was the 90s. It was so great. Well, late 80s. But
Okay.
but so grateful because I don't know. A lot of people's moms, whenever I ask them about this, do your mom ever have stacks of books that she wants to read, but she never gets around to read? Like, yes. She has all these magazines she wants to read, never gets around to read. Yes. My mom had all of these. And one of them was this book called A Catechist Tells His Stories. And I think now it's called, it's something about anecdotes in the catechism. It's published, I have a copy of it, but basically what it does is goes through points of doctrine. Each chapter is another on confession, on the anointing of the sick, or on God is Trinity. Jesus is God. And then has a number of anecdotes or stories of saints that exemplify these points of doctrine. So they're really easy to read, a paragraph or maybe a page long. And here I am, 15, 16, reading these. Like, this is incredible. I'm just getting through stories. I'm getting this doctrine.
Right.
I hit the chapter on the Eucharist, and I was done. I don't know if I was sick that day when they taught that Jesus is truly present in the Eucharist, but I remember going downstairs, talking to my siblings and saying, do you guys know that Jesus is that's at Mass? That's really Jesus? I'm like, yes. I'm like, no, that's like really Jesus. I'm like, yeah, moron, we know that. Like, I just found out in reading this book. And that was like, well, gosh, Lord, if you, not dismissing confession, but if that's really you, I cannot even imagine what it would be like to say, this is my body and this is my blood, and have that, be able to offer that, feed the world with God himself. And so that even amplified even more. Just, God, let me know. Just let me know if you want me to be a priest or not. And then I really was fed on a diet of stories of saints, stories of martyrs, stories of those heroic men, women as well, but those heroic priests, missionary priests. I always wanted to be like them. And so St. Francis Xavier was my confirmation saint as a missionary, as well as he was a track star at the University of Paris, I think. And so I'm like, yeah, I'll be a track star too. But it was that just kept on saying, go. Like, why not? Who was it? You probably know, maybe all the saints have said this. Maybe it was St. Maximilian Kolbe who said, why not be a saint? Why not be a great saint? That sense of like, why settle for mediocrity in anything, but especially when it comes to following the Lord and saying yes to the vocation, the call that he has on your life.